In the final video here, we're going to call all of the getter methods from our main program so that we can see how they work together. So at this point, our data type for the student type is complete. We have all the details in here for the data fields that are part of my new data type that I've created. And then I've created a sequence of 10 different methods. We have 2 different constructors that are used to initialize values in a new student object as it's created. Then we also created 4 different modifier methods that allow us to change the values that are stored inside an object. We called those setter methods. And then finally, we had 4 different accessor methods. Those are methods that allow us to retrieve the data values that are stored inside an object. So let's check them out in our main program. We already have part of a main program written. So the main program that we had written before allowed us to enter some local information just stored locally in our main program. Didn't have anything to do with object-oriented stuff at all. And then we used those data values to initialize a new student type object using our non-default our non-default constructor, the one that required parameters. And then suppose we wanted to print out information that was part of this new student object. We haven't done that yet. So if we wanted to do that, we need to be able to retrieve the information from our student1 object. And we can do that by calling those getter methods that are part of the class. So for example, if we wanted to print out everything that was part of the student1 object, first let's just try printing out student1 and seeing what happens. I'm gonna compile and run that. So it asked me to enter the first name and last name. So we were doing Sally Smith. She has a 4.0 and 15 credits. And you see that when it prints it out, it says com.company student type. That's the data type of the thing we were trying to print. We were trying to print student1. And then this other part over here is the memory address where that particular glob of information is stored in our computer. And that's kind of interesting, but that's not real user-friendly, and you probably didn't really care about the data type or the memory location for that particular object. So we have to do something different if we want to print out the information stored inside the memory. So what we have to do is call those various accessor methods. Oops, I didn't mean to delete all that stuff. Try to get it back. Oh, super. All right, so I didn't want to print the memory location. I wanted to print the content. So I'm going to say get first name. And that's going to be the method that retrieves the first name, and I'll be able to print that out to the screen. Let's say that I also want to print a space, and then I'm going to print the student's last name. Add that in here, student1.get last name. Print that out right next to the first name. And then maybe I want to print the GPA on a line by itself, maybe with a label. So I could call student1's get GPA method, and that will return the value of the GPA that's stored there for that student. And then finally, I could print out the student credits. Yeah, maybe I'll print that with a label credit. Student1.get credits earned. Cool. So let's run that and see what happens so far. So again, that's calling my various getter methods. So if I say Sally Smith, she has a 4.0 and 15 credits. Then the computer echoes back. It's retrieving the information from that bundle, student1, and printing out the first name, then a space, last name, and then on the next line, GPA and the value of the GPA that's stored inside that bundle, and then credit, and then the value that's stored inside the bundle for credits. So that's pretty cool. You can see how all of those different components of the student class are working together. We called the constructor to put information into the object, and then we could retrieve the data using these getter methods. Let's see stuff with student number 2. Suppose we tried, printing out the same stuff. I'm just going to copy and paste, and then I'll change it so it's student 2 instead of student 1. Let's see what happens when we run that. So this is the information for student 1. And then student 2, we initialized with the default constructor. That's the one where it sets the GPA and the credits to be 0. So we can see that here for student 2. But for the name, it just printed out null, null. And that's because in our student types default constructor, we didn't initialize first name and last name. So null is just a fancy word that means that, like, that data value is not set. And that's fine. Maybe that's what we wanted, or maybe we wanted to, set our own value for the student's first name and last name. Maybe we wanted to create a new student object, but then later on in the program, we wanted to maybe allow somebody to enter information that represented the student's first name and last name. So how could we get that information in there after the object is already constructed? Once the object's constructed, you can't call the constructor again with that same object. And so we have to think of another way to get information into the student object besides the constructor. And hopefully you're thinking, hey, we wrote all of those setter methods. That allows us to modify the data value stored inside an object. So we could use those. We could say something like student2.set first name. And then we could store a specific data value in there, like Joe. And we could store a value for their last name as well, like Jones. So now we've set the GPA and credits earned for the student by creating this new student object using the default constructor. And then we've hand initialized the first name and last name. We put in literal values here, but you could also add prompts to ask the user for specific values. So let's try that out just to confirm that the information gets stored in there. So again, it's prompting me for the information about the first object, student 1. So that was Sally Smith, 4.0, 15 credits. And then it doesn't prompt me for information about the second object. That's because we used our literal values, Joe Jones, to initialize it. And then the credits and GPA were initialized by the default constructor. So at this point, hopefully you have a good idea of how these two files, main.java and our student type, work together to create a complete program. The student data type is going to be a great model. We'll be using similar techniques to create many data types. For example, in upcoming labs, it asks you to make a movie data type. Later on this semester, we're going to be making a UMW person data type. All of these are going to be really similar to the student type. All of them are going to require you to create a series of data fields that represent the essential information about that object. And then the contents of the methods for the classes is going to be a default and non-default constructor, and then a series of getter and setter methods that make sense for those data types.